Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Larry.
Hi, I'm Amber.
And I'm Jason.
And I'm Josh. And we have two very special guests joining Larry and I on the show. Returning from our 13th season is Amber from Amber Unabridged and the resurrected The Drunken Library.
That's right.
Great to have you back. Amber was on our discussion about Doctor Who Borrowed Time. For the very first time is one of the most scholarly American booktubers that been a part of this community a few years ago, or joined the community a few years ago. If you like booktubers such as Steve Donahue or Mark Richardson, you will definitely enjoy his channel. And that is Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse. It's great to have you on board.
Thanks, Josh.
I always felt a sense of appreciation when you put together a class based off of one of my book tags that I created, the Scholar's Book Tag.
That was a really great tag, A. B, I have a tendency to think about, having been a teacher in the past, I have a tendency to think about the kinds of classes that I would like to design. Mm-hmm. And that tag really just gave me a nice shove in that direction. And I ended up doing a year-long series on it, and just a ton of people participated, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. So
remind us what the class was about.
So it was on mortality in literature and film. So we were looking exclusively at novels, nonfiction, poetry, and films that dealt with death and with grief around death, with the idea of facing one's own mortality, with war. It doesn't sound cheerful, and it wasn't cheerful per se. It was really rewarding.
And it was certainly, wish I would have been able to follow along with it a little bit more, but it did encourage me to buy my own copy of 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. Today we are going to be going over a short story by Ernest Hemingway, one of the most renowned writers in American literature. And the short story that we will be discussing is The Short Happy Life of Francis Mccumber. The discussion starter that I have for this discussion is this. The Short Happy Life of Francis Mccumber was originally published in Cosmopolitan magazine in 1936 and follows hunting trips that the title character makes with a Robert Wilson, while his wife, Margaret, is also in attendance on these trips. The short story is often described as a coming-of-age work for someone who is 35 years of age. Do you see this as that kind of work or about something else?
I was thinking earlier that is exactly how I would describe it, would be as a coming-of-age story. I think that is what the title is hinting at, and I think that's what happens toward the end of the story and why it's called The Short Happy Life. Because though this man is 35 years old, he really does not begin to live until he finds his courage, right? And that's kind of what's happening at the end there, is he becomes a man in a way that this other man, Ryan, would respect. He's discovering this kind of masculine ability to overcome his fear. It doesn't last long, though.
Unfortunately, the way that it ends is in some sort of freak accident, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, see, and I'm not necessarily sure it was a freak accident. It's interesting because I hadn't really approached this as a coming of age story, but I can see that approach to it now that it's come up. But what I find interesting, and part of what I was trying to do, after I finished the story, was try to wrap my feelings around it, because I didn't necessarily love the beginning of it. By the end, I liked it more. The story. I find it interesting thinking of it as a coming of age story. It's not necessarily just Francis Macomber that grew up. Could make an argument that his wife might have also, because she realized that she didn't want to, be stuck in whatever life handed her. She wanted to take action into her own hands. Not that it was a good action. It was some sort of agency over her future.
When you talk about coming of age, it's just kind of like a coming into your own, right? Maximizing your kind of potential. Like I don't think that you could really apply that to this woman. She's just, if indeed it's not an accident, then it's cold-blooded murder. That's not.
No, I'm not saying it's good, but I think a point could be made that she looked at the options presented to her, because he was very clearly planning to leave her, and she knew that, and she would have been left with nothing. And for women at that time, she was trying to take some sort of control over her life. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying, I would not say that murder is a good thing to do. I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting interesting aspect to add to the story.
I don't see this as anything different from as far as Hemingway writing women is concerned. I feel that within this piece, as far as this and realizations are concerned, I feel that Margaret's character is very initial disposition. It's somewhat passive, however, and it almost seems like her making that shot from the car or from the vehicle it almost comes off as being ridiculous. That's where it makes it look like a freak accident. There's much more complication to it because of her extramarital relations with Robert.
Right, and we get the impression too in that conversation that they have after that session. This isn't the first time that has happened, right? That she's done this before, because he's saying, you said that this wouldn't happen on this trip, right? So that kind of implies that it's happened before, that she's slept with other men.
Okay, because it almost sounded like she had murdered other.
No.
I think she's been playing the field. What she's been doing. Getting back to your original question, Josh, I don't really see it as a coming of age story, and I think the reason why. I think Hemingway is maybe being a little bit ironic, I suppose, about the title or with the title. Yeah, we're led to believe that this is the first time this character, Francis Mccumber, has really felt alive. For me, I feel like when I think of coming of age stories, I think about people finding themselves facing things, facing situations in which there are consequences, et cetera, et cetera. And, the fact that we learned that how they were approaching the animals with the vehicle, that it was illegal, right? Like the guide could get in big trouble for this. They seem to be skirting consequences. I don't know. There was nothing sportsmanlike about how they did this. I suppose on some level, he's kind of, as a character, he's taking what he can get as a coming of age story, but it didn't really feel like that to me. I felt like Hemingway was being a little bit more ironic. And I also read the final scene, that last shot, as an accident. I don't think she was intending to do that. I think that these are two people who were fated to spend the rest of their lives miserable with each other. There's that great line, right? She was too beautiful for him to leave her, and he was too rich for her to leave him. Like, I don't know, it was a kind of mutual entanglement thing happening with the two of them. So I don't think she was looking to murder him.
It's like one of those things that it could be read either way, and it could be both at the same time too, right? Like where she's not even sure of what her intention is when she picks up that gun, and it just happens to be that she shoots the guy. It could be hinting at something like a Freudian slip or something like that. Because it is interesting that the thing that the hunter says to her after the thing is, well, he would have left you, right? She was planning, or he was planning on leaving her until he discovered this courage within him that would have, right? Like, I think that the real reason that he had not left her the first time that she had an extramarital affair was that he would have been afraid to. And also, I think that she knew that, and she liked the fact that he was too weak to leave her. In some regard, because it meant that she could do what she wanted to do whenever she wanted to do it and still be able to come home at night. So there's a motivation there for her to want to kill him in that moment. But whether or not it is, right, is not really, it's not made especially clear.
I think that going off on a point that Jason made, I would lean toward that fact that there wasn't much of a coming of age aspect, or there wasn't the opportunity for there to be a coming of age aspect, because to me, something that is coming of age is a realization that someone makes that makes them not necessarily a better person, but a more mature person. I don't think that any of the characters really became better or mature in any which way. And for Francis Mccumber's, in his situation, he didn't have that opportunity. We'll have no idea because he was shot and killed.
Well, finding virtue is a maturation, right? So if you accept that he has found a level of courage that he had not experienced, and that is a maturing. It's a maturation of his spirit. I would say that, the expert hunter in this story definitely did not think that this was cheating in any way. At least he didn't let on that he did, or it was unsportsmanlike, even though it was an illegal action as far as firing from the car and all that. Did not take away from the fact that they did in the end have to go into the bush, into the tall grass to kill the thing. And that's where the proving ground really was for this guy.
So my question then would be, though, what difference is there between courage and between bravado, I suppose? Because it seemed less like courage to me than it did like adrenaline, I suppose. And I felt like he kept kind of pushing to go into the bush to approach where the animal was as a way of, let's get this over with before this adrenaline stops and I'm going to be afraid again. I think that he wanted to get it over with because, maybe even as a character, maybe he recognized that this was going to be short-lived, this kind of rush that he felt. But yeah, I think they're related, courage and bravado, or courage, gusto.
Right,
but
yeah, they're
different things, yeah.
There's like the Aristotelian perspective on it would be that every virtue is kind of placed in between two vices, right? So you have cowardice on one side and then rashness on the other side of courage. And if you just hit that golden mean just right, then that's courage. You have to do it all the time, right? From an Aristotelian point of view, it's like if you're going to be a virtuous person, you always have to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason, to the right effect. And whether or not this guy would have actually done that, yeah, you can't tell because his life is so short. You kind of got to take Hemingway's word for it.
The other thing you have to take into account is he's going from dealing with a lion to dealing with a buffalo. I think that's somewhat of a level, that's a bit of a downgrade, because as much as the buffalo puts on a good fight, the lion in its nature is quicker and more aggressive.
Has longer teeth.
Yes.
And claws. I wanted to say too, kind of, Jason, what you were saying about whether it was like courage or bravado. I actually agree with that a lot, because as I was reading it, I read it very much as, oh, this is the way that Francis is acting feels very much like a bully. You know, it's like he was a coward, he was terrified, and then all of a sudden he got a couple good shots, a couple bulls went down with the assistance of the vehicle, which was illegal, and all of a sudden he had all of this confidence to go into the bush and get that last bull and to go and try to take on another lion and to try to leave his wife. And it's like, okay, but what about when the adrenaline does wear off? It read to me very much like this is the high that he's getting off of the kill rather than anything that he did through his own merit.
Yeah, but there would have been just as much adrenaline the first night, right? Or the first day when they went after the lion, right? I mean, he's still going to have as much adrenaline pumping through him. But in that instance, instead of standing tall and finishing the job, he turned hide and ran without even realizing it.
I would have ran too, just for the record.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've never been on a lion hunt, so I mean, they're definitely scary animals. So
as a person who is an extreme enthusiast for big cat, I feel very confident in saying that if I were in a territory with lions and I had a vehicle and I was not trying to shoot them, I feel like there's a good chance that I would probably be fine if I just didn't frighten them or if they didn't happen to be starving.
Yeah, well, if it was cornered and wounded, that would have been it might be a different story as in this case.
Definitely. Yeah, I definitely don't want to be in that situation.
What are you guys' thoughts as far as the other characters are concerned? More so, Robert and Margaret's and their place in Francis's situation.
So I don't know if you guys saw the video that Lukash at a Cool Reader's Thesis did the other day about whether we're top-down readers or bottom-up readers, whether we focus on details and then extract the kind of larger picture from that, or if we look at the larger picture and then maybe get into some of the details. And I look at details first when I read, and I mark two things that Margaret said to her husband. The first thing is on page 12 of my edition. I think they're getting ready to kill the lion. Yeah, he's been hearing it all night long. She says, well, then, as Wilson said, kill him and stop his roaring. Yes, darling Francis Mccumber, it sounds easy, doesn't it? And then she says, you're not afraid, are you? Which is so much different than saying, are you afraid, right? Are you afraid is a real question. You're not afraid, are you, is an accusation. And I felt like that was a really cruel thing for her to say to him. Later in the story, when they're fighting, after she gets back from the guide's tent, her fun little thing over there, so they're arguing about that. The husband tells her, you think I'll take anything? And she says, I know you will, sweet. And that, again, is just cruel. She's saying, I know you'll take anything, so that gives me carte blanche. I will do whatever the hell I want. There's nothing you can do about it, etc., etc. So I felt like there was real cruelty in her. And as far as the guide goes, I thought that the real cruelty in him came out at the very end when she's saying, stop it, and he's pushing her buttons, he's taunting her, and she just keeps insisting, stop it, stop it, stop it. She's commanding him, and he won't put up with a woman giving him a command. And it's only when she says, oh, please stop it, when it becomes a kind of begging, that's when he quits. And yeah, I just feel like those little details in the dialogue reveal so much about the harshness and the cruelty in the character of the wife and the guide.
He does seem to represent a sense of, you can call it toxic masculinity.
Well, you could, but no, right? I mean, it's just masculinity. What he is meant to represent in the story is just maximum masculinity.
You have what Francis, in order to step up to his goals, needs that assistance from Robert. Robert's the one that gives him that push. The way that he ultimately is in that affair with his wife, the way that he controls people, being able to do that.
Well, he's not
in his
controlling
position.
Anybody really. Who's he controlling?
I think he knows that he has that sense of superiority to Francis as his teacher, and
Well,
that he's able to control him. And then the fact that he has that control over his wife as well, because technically, if somebody sees the situation differently, they could charge his wife for murder at the very end.
Yes. And that's another interesting thing, too, in that aspect, right? That might lead to the fact that maybe she did murder him and she knew that the guy protests too much because of the fact that she knew that it was illegal the way that they killed the buffalo. And she pretty much had his career as a hunter in the palm of her hand. So that's another piece of evidence that might point to it being murder in the end. Aside from that, I don't think that he controls Francis. I think that he is trying to help Francis grow up, even though he's very annoyed by his cowardice and his lack of manners, I guess, right? When he's asking him about whether or not he's going to talk, like, you don't ask another man that. He's just the fixture of masculinity, in my opinion. Any flaws that are there, I think, are probably flaws that Hemingway had personally, or any blinders or anything like that. But I think as far as the intention is concerned, I think that he is meant to represent the he's full of manliness. He's just the man's man of manliness.
So
I agree. I think that was an intention.
I would disagree that he's interested in helping Francis grow up. I would say there are probably better ways to do that than to spend the night with a person's wife. There are better ways to do that. And speaking to Josh's point and the idea of the guide being toxic on some level, the fact that he brings a double cop anytime he goes out on one of these things, he is presuming that he's going to be able to steal someone's spirit away, someone's significant other, and there's something really, really vile, really manipulative about that, and really, really entitled, I think, about that. And one of the things, a word that's just been buzzing through my head for weeks now because of films I've been watching and the books I've been reading, is hubris. And this felt very much to me in some ways like a word, hubris, right? These people who are going out and they're just killing whatever they see. They're killing all three of the buffalo, et cetera, et cetera. This kind of arrogant entitlement that everything I see is mine. I will take whatever I want. And hubris being, of course, it's going to come back and bite you on the ass somehow, whether that's a shot in the back of the head from someone else or the possibility of having your life guide with them. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's something, he is very much a kind of macho man's man, right? You get the sense, I mean, when you're reading the story, you almost want to picture Hemingway as the guy, right? Hemingway probably saw himself as the guy. The biography tells us, I mean, there was something really unsavory about Hemingway's kind of macho posture, I suppose is a way to put it.
Hunting aspects in this case, to me, is just classic Hemingway, because he is constantly writing pieces that are taking place when it comes to hunting and fishing. I think he does apply a lot of human dominance to their superiority on all aspects of life and living beings.
So I had kind of points, a little bit of what all of you had said leading up to right now. In regards to Wilson, I agree with Jason that he had a lot of hubris. He felt kind of entitled, but I think, he didn't really care about other people at all. He's just like, at the end of the day, I'm just here to get a paycheck. I'm good at what I do, whether somebody's wife wants to sleep with me or whether or not I help somebody grow up or not. Doesn't matter, as long as I do what I was paid to do, and then I'm done after. So whatever ends up happening is what ends up happening. And then I also feel like, we're talking about the marriage, we're talking about the relationship with the guide. I feel like the entire dynamic between the three of them is really just a game of at which point who has the upper hand. In the marriage, they were clearly toxic for each other. They were clearly unhappy. They couldn't leave because the other one had something that they each needed. They were kind of trapped by circumstance. When they were with the guide, he was the one who was in charge of their safety. He was the one in making sure that they were gonna, not get mauled by a lion or run over by a buffalo. On the flip side, it then provided the guide with the opportunity to be like, oh, you're a coward. Oh, you're a cheater. He kind of was able to get something to hold over them. And even the end of the story, the wife, Margaret, and it kind of going all the way back to the very beginning. Larry, you said something about like, well, she just kind of was impulsive and who knows if she did it on purpose or not. I feel like she probably did it on purpose, but she's like, well, either I'll shoot my husband and then I'll get all of his money and I don't have to worry about him leaving me, or I'll get the bull and then he'll be so grateful that he won't threaten to leave me. I don't feel like she really cared what happened. She's just like, I'm just going to do something and whatever works. Yeah. But then either way, Wilson still was just like, oh, okay, I see what you did. And she's like, shut up.
If I did not know how old Margaret was, she came off to me, not necessarily by age, but by the way that she presented herself as someone that reminded me of Marie from Everybody Loves Raymond.
I don't think I've ever seen an entire episode of that show.
Or Doris Roberts, if you recognize her as an actress. Her disposition she was very pedantic, ultimately it came off that she felt very out of place in their circumstance. I think as far as her language is concerned, it was very reflective of the Hemingway woman. I saw a lot of similarities to the language in Hills Like White Elephants. It is passive, it's complex, the struggles are hidden and internal, whereas the male characters have complexities, but it's a little bit more visible and you can see where they are struggling.
It's a very different character, I think, than the woman in Hills Like White Elephants. There is some overarching similarity between not all, but most of the women that Hemingway writes, and it's kind of got like a childlike passiveness. But in this case, she is not really passive, right? She's more passive aggressive than passive, right? She's getting her shots in.
In this case, I mean, there are moments where she's passive aggressive, but then there's moments where she's saying she doesn't want to talk about it, leave me alone, kind of.
Yeah, but I mean, when she's in her element, she's kind of being passive aggressive.
Comes off as very snarky too.
I wanted to say, when we were talking earlier about the masculinity of this man, right? And I talked about the blind spot, Hemingway, and I think that blind spot is with the fact that Hemingway would have found nothing wrong, I don't think, with the hunter sleeping with this woman, even though she's married to the guy. I think that I get this sense, and I'm not sure where I read it. I think that it is somewhere in Hemingway where his idea is that if a woman wants to sleep with you, the only moral option that you have is to sleep with her, because if you don't, you'll like destroy her or something. If you turn her down, that's never the right answer, is not to sleep with a woman who wants to sleep with you. It's a very convenient answer, but I do think that is that's part of Hemingway's moral code for most of his life, and I think that would explain that part of it. Because when I'm talking about this guy being the epitome of masculinity, I don't mean in a true sense, in Hemingway's intent. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is that
I agree. I think Wilson was extremely toxic, but I don't think Hemingway saw him that way. He's just like, this is a man. This is what all men should aspire to be. Even though now, as a reader, I read it as, oh, this guy, I don't have a polite way of saying what I want to say, but leave. He can go. I definitely feel like Hemingway wrote him with the intention of him being like the ideal archetype of what a man should be. So yeah, Larry, I agree with you on that.
Hemingway is what I seem to view as masculinist literature. To me, it's not necessarily, if you even want to consider it, I wouldn't see him as the ideal.
Who, Hemingway?
Yeah, Hemingway.
No, the ideal would not blow his own head off with a shotgun, right? That doesn't happen. That's not an ideal situation.
I know that if you want to read something about, or what you would call men's literature, whatever you want to call that.
He would call it dude bro.
Dude bro. Oh. Yeah, I don't think people think that Hemingway is the Walmart of that genre. I think that it would be better to look for other options.
I agree.
So I wanted to get back to what Josh had brought up, Hills Like White Elephants. At the very beginning of this story, the first page or two of this story reminded me a lot of Hills Like White Elephants. And in both stories, from the get-go, I mean, it goes on longer if I remember right in Hills Like White Elephants, but from the get-go, we have these characters talking about something in a really kind of cagey way. They're talking about something having gone wrong, or something not having gone according to plan. Or something that, like an elephant in the room, right? No pun intended, since we're talking about safaris. In that story, memory serves, it was abortion, I think, right?
Yes.
I haven't read that in like 25 years.
Procedure.
And in this story, it was cowardice, right? This idea of cowardice, this idea of a man being somehow more a boy than a man, et cetera, et cetera. People being really, the guy himself, and then the other two people being really uncomfortable with that idea. And I found it really wonderful to read how Hemingway the beginning of the story felt a little bit like a chess match. And Amber, I think you touched on this, right, where it was a little bit like a game. People were seeing how they might get the upper hand somehow. Yeah, it felt very, very just kind of wonderful and strategic, the way that these characters were relating to each other.
Yeah.
And even when she went off to her tent, right, and the idea is that, she's going to be in there crying or whatever, she comes out, she's totally composed, resolved, and she's changed the game up at that point. So yeah, so I thought it was cool that it felt so much like Hills Like White Elephant. I have no idea in what order these were published, I assume, because this is, I think, the second story in this book. This was probably published far ahead of that, but Hills
Like White Elephants came out first. According to this, my copy here, and I think it's structured very similar to the one that you have. He made mention to the fact that the first four, which is The Short Happy Life of Francis Mccumber, The Capital of the World, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, and Old Man at the Bridge, were published the most recent, and that everything else was published before.
Gotcha. Okay. I wonder why the hell he structured the book in this way.
Yeah, I questioned that myself. But unless he wanted to promote his new works, because I think that was one of that kind of collection was the first time that he released those works, because the others were in short story collections. It wasn't a complete short story collection. It was just a general short story collection.
Yeah, so it could have very well been a marketing decision there.
Yeah.
Possibly.
So kind of touching on what Jason just said about how the beginning started off like sort of setting up sort of the chess match, if you will. I feel like I actually really liked the opening sentence and I wrote it down in my journal. And I feel like that kind of sets the whole tone for it very well, just right off the bat. It basically says like, okay, everybody, it was lunchtime, everybody sitting under the tent, pretending that nothing had happened. And I'm like, oh, something is awkward. What happened? And then it tells you.
Well, he's really, with that sentence, he's so good at involving you as a reader, making you curious at the outset, right? And it's one of the wonderful things, right? I feel like this has such a great beginning and such a great ending. I mean, the last page and a half of this story was so suspenseful. Right. I mean, even on down to the bad shots that Francis was taking at this buffalo, right, and the way that the chips would splinter off or flint off the horns, and I just thought even just that was just magnificent. And there's so much suspense, right? Because it's the short, happy life. You're like, well, what's going to happen here? I mean, through the whole story, I was like, is he going to kill himself because he feels so, this whole cowardice thing is over his head? Then in that last page and a half, you have no idea if he's going to fall victim to some kind of accident or get run over by this bull or what have you. So I just thought it was a hell of a beginning and a really tremendous ending as well.
But I will say too, I had a feeling that Margaret was going to end up killing him between the title of his life being short. As soon as they said when they hopped out of the car and left the gun with her, I was like, with as toxic as their marriage was, oh, she's going to shoot him. She's going to shoot him and take all his money because he's threatening to leave her. Even having that thought in my head, I was still actually surprised because of the way it was written. The buffalo was getting closer and closer, and then he talks about like the white hot pain, and I was like, oh, I thought she was going to shoot him, but apparently he got gutted by the buffalo. Then it talked about the gunshot, and I was like, oh, okay, so it was the gun. But it's still, even with that thought in my head, it still made me question that. I agree, the beginning and the ending were the best parts.
So is there anything in the story that suggests or that leads us to believe that she might have been good with the gun? Because that's one of the major reasons why I feel like it was an accident, was that she saw the buffalo charging them, and she felt desperate and she was going to fire off this shot regardless of what kind of gun it is. And I don't know how far away she was from them, but I'm guessing it was a decent way. Yet to hit what you're aiming at is not an easy thing to do. I just didn't get the sense that she had any familiarity with guns, so it would be just a kind of accident what had happened. And she was trying to shoot the buffalo because, I mean, hell, she might have been as afraid of what was going on as they were. And like the way Hemingway wrote it, it was terrifying to read. So was there anything in the story that suggested she had a history with guns?
I don't recall. I think that kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about how like she's just like, well, I'm just gonna aim and shoot and see what happens. She, it's kind of like a win-win for her. Either she saves her husband and maybe he'll feel so grateful for saving him that he won't leave her penniless, or she kills him and he's dead and she gets all of his money. It could be just like and then she could also just play like everything was crazy and I was scared and I didn't even intend to pull the trigger. She could play that card, but she probably did feel, well, I'm gonna be screwed over if I don't shoot the gun, so I might as well at least give it a shot. No pun intended.
Hemingway, I think, makes it intentional to keep it enigmatic. Generally, in this case, you don't really get her perspective unless she's with the other male characters in the piece.
That's true. Even the lion gets a point of view paragraph. But
that was fabulous. Wasn't that cool?
I actually hated that part. I hated it because I like I said, I'm a huge fan of big cat. I love them. I thought I was going to work in animal conservation for like several years. I was planning to. For me, I'm reading the story and I'm like, oh great, they're hunting a lion. That's cool. That's fine. And then all of a sudden it switches point of view of the lion as soon as it gets shot, and it's explaining all of the pain and graphic detail. And I was like, cool, this is what I needed on an afternoon. Fine. It's lovely.
I thought it was fabulous.
It was interesting, but mostly I was irritated. But I realized that that's also a very personal thing for me. So
another interesting detail was the specific measurements as far as the way in which the bullet hit Francis Mccumber. The fact that it was about 2 inches up and a little to one side of the base of his skull, which I'm trying to wrap myself around, questioning what she was actually aiming at.
I don't know what she was aiming at, but it seemed like she got him right on target.
Maybe she missed by 2 inches. Is that what you're getting at, Josh?
It's the question is if she wanted to prove herself on the field, because the way that Hemingway puts it, she could be proving herself in different kinds of ways and using the shot shot against a particular animal, in this case a buffalo, metaphorically. Kind of like the way that in The Old Man in the Sea, where big fish and how that represents the challenges of life. What were your thoughts about the titles and the way that the characters were referred? Kind of like, for instance, they would refer to Francis Mccumber would be Francis Mccumber, or by his full name, Francis Mccumber, whereas Margaret was either Margaret or Margot or Mccumber's wife.
Well, there's something really, again, really macho about men. You know, you see it in military films, really macho about men referring to each other by their last names. I mean, I don't know of anybody, I don't think I refer to any men that I know by their last names only, especially if I'm addressing them. It's very, very macho to me. And the fact that she's usually referred to as with kind of abbreviation of her first name, or as his wife, right, as his significant other, his possession, something like this. For me, what was more interesting, I suppose, than the names was how, you know, Wilson is thinking about, so there's this part right near the end of the story, we're in his mind and he's thinking about the kinds of men like Francis, right? Their figures stay boyish when they're 50. The great American boy men, strange people. Mccumber now, damn strange fellow, probably meant the end of cuckoldry too. Well, that would be a damned good thing, Beggar had probably been afraid all his life. It's just the way that the characters are painting each other, I suppose, in their own minds. You know, I felt like was a lot more, you know, interesting, because if he's calling Mccumber, when he has this kind of boyish idea, this kind of fearful boyish idea of Mccumber, it would make him calling Mccumber by his last name ironic as well, right? Because he doesn't think that this guy is a stud in any way. If anything, he's kind of bringing him into a drama. So Mccumber's there to be on safari, and this guy's like, all right, well, my job is to bring this guy into a drama. And if he's a boy man who's going to, you know, be pasty faced and, you know, have milky skin by the time he's 50 years old and still look like he's 18, I need to make him believe that he's a stud. So I thought, yeah, I mean, I suppose I thought it was really interesting to see how the inner thoughts of characters had some kind of role in how they addressed each other, or thought of each other, referred to each other.
From what I'm seeing, they saw Margaret in a form of inferiority, for sure. Has anybody read The Secret Life of Walter Mitty?
No.
No, but I love the Ben Stiller film.
Yeah, it's based off of the James Thurber short story. Yeah, they would refer to Walter Mitty would be Walter Mitty, Mitty. His wife had that nagging disposition and pretty much was subservient to her orders and her needs. She was strictly referred to as Mrs. Mitty. So it seemed like it was a sense of superiority. Whereas here they view Robert Wilson is the established male figure. Francis Mccumber is trying to find himself in his masculinity, whereas Margaret is more of the tag along, and she really doesn't do much for Francis, and for Robert it's just to fulfill his needs.
Well, no, it's not really to fulfill his needs, it's to fulfill her own needs, is what she's
Or
not
to punish her husband.
Yeah, to punish him, and I think to keep him from discovering their courage. I think that
is Robert getting
likes
something
the
out of
arrangement
it?
the way that they have it.
Is Robert getting?
Is
he getting something out of Margaret being there?
He got laid.
No, I mean,
Not late.
he got that.
Then his needs are being fulfilled. Simple as that.
No, because he didn't need that. And in fact, like I said, I feel like he did that out of
icing
a sense
on the
of
cake.
moral. No, I think that he did that out of a sense of moral obligation. That, you know, a twisted morality, not any kind of real morality, but he just felt like that's just what you do when a woman comes on you.
But he's still fulfilling his needs, because you don't necessarily need it. He's doing it for his own.
Need it.
He's doing it for his own.
So it's not fulfilling his needs. No, he's doing it for her fulfillment.
According to him, it's his needs. According to Robert Wilson, that's him fulfilling his own needs, when as we as readers don't necessarily see it as necessary, but Robert does.
Where does he say that?
It's implied.
No.
But I mean, maybe with the double cut and him again just feeling like he's entitled to take whatever he wants.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you want to say it's icing on top or something, that might be true, but it's not something that he is looking for. I don't think that he's trying to do this. I think that he is rooting for what's his name? I forgot his name.
Francis.
Yeah. I think he's rooting for him, and I think that he is trying to help him to reach this new level of masculinity, and she's trying to hinder it. I think that she is trying to keep him from getting there because she likes the arrangement that they have where she is free to do whatever she wants with whoever she wants, that he won't leave her because he's not man enough to.
Yeah, I see that.
A lot remains a mystery, though, because of what happened and how it concluded.
Yeah, but that is interesting, though, that you bring up that line about 2 inches up. 2 inches up from what? That does kind of imply to me that she was aiming for his head and missed by 2 inches at the spot.
It still killed him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Already.
It's interesting because it's like so much, it's written in such a way that it's ambiguous, but also it doesn't exactly feel ambiguous at all. Like it feels very intentional to me, at least, that she was hoping that he would die. You know, even if she didn't have this confidence in the skills to be able to kill him, I still feel like that was what she was hoping for. Her previous established plan, as Larry pointed out, of just keeping him on a leash to use his money however she wanted to and use any guys they encountered however she wanted to. You know, he was about to leave. He was about to ruin all of that for her. So it felt very much like she intended to kill him, but it was also just written in a way that you could claim it was an accident. You could claim that wasn't her intention. It was interesting.
Yeah, that's classic Hemingway, right? Where he leaves the really important questions kind of below the surface, right? They talk about the iceberg stuff or whatever they say about Hemingway, where that's kind of his style. So I think the answers are probably there. I think everything he writes is intentional and has a purpose in the story. So, you know, you got to dig to kind of get at the meaning of things and what he's trying to get at. That's the fun of Hemingway. That's why.
You're referring to tip of the iceberg, like the Jungian way of thought?
No, well, not necessarily Jungian, but what I mean is that the narrative would be the part of the iceberg that's above the water.
Oh.
But there's a lot more going on underneath the surface.
Yes, I think that is Jungian.
It's a really cool way of thinking of a work of art, right? That we have the surface reading of it. And the more willing we are to kind of dig beneath the surface, that's where the really dangerous stuff happens. That's where it becomes ominous and the threat, because those icebergs are way bigger underneath the water than they are above the water.
Hemingway is known for that, and especially his female characters really have that sense where you get what they're saying on the page, but it feels like there's so much more going on.
Yeah, I mean, and then you see that with this woman in this. Like, I read this story twice, and the first time I was reading through it, in the first part of the story, to me, she just seemed kind of like very passive, very sweet, kind of just trying to grapple with what's going on. But then the second time I read through that part of it, it's like, man, she is just being really cruel. She is like really like taking shots at this guy, like trying to emasculate him throughout the war.
Well, and the fact that, all of that happened after, and we don't know it as it's happening, right? As we're reading that initial kind of lunch conversation, right, with the drinks and whatnot, we don't know at that point that she has kissed the guy in front of her husband earlier that day. And if there was anything I didn't like in the story about her character, it's that, and maybe I would need to read it again, because like you were saying, the first time you read it, it felt very passive, and the second time it felt very like that she was kind of putting her barbs in. So when I read it, so I just read it the once. Yeah, I didn't anything in her behavior in that first scene over lunch have made her behavior believable given what she had done earlier that day. Maybe I just need to read it again. But it felt really jarring to me when she kissed the guide in front of her husband after taking her hand out of her husband's hand and stuff. I was just like, man, it's one thing to give your husband the cold shoulder. It's another thing to like tap on the dude's shoulder in front of him and pull the guy's head around and give him a big smooch. That's a whole different league of cruelty there.
It almost feels like you're trying to spark a reaction from your superior.
Yeah.
Do we have any final thoughts? Things that we didn't bring up entirely?
It's just whet my appetite to read more Hemingway. I mean, I hadn't read Hemingway literally in probably, I graduated college 20 years ago. And so it's probably been 21 or 22 years since I've read Hemingway. And this was really wonderful.
Yeah, I would agree. This is a great piece. I had not read this one before. So anytime Hemingway comes up, I'm always happy to jump into it. And I would rate this story probably the best short story of Hemingway's that I've read since The Hills of Kilimanjaro. I really enjoyed that one.
Snows of Kilimanjaro?
Yes, the Snows of Kilimanjaro. That's the one.
Hills are like white elephants.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but so it's probably just on first reading, I would say that it's my second favorite. So it's a great story, great jumping in point for Hemingway. I would recommend it.
I wouldn't put this among my favorites. I would say that Soldier's Home is probably my favorite short story of his, and then Capital of the World. I would probably put this alongside Snows of Kilimanjaro. I think Hills Like White Elephants was a bit better. I prefer his short stories as a whole to to the novels that I've read of his.
Yeah, but you still haven't read the classics, right? Like his
Not
most
yet.
renowned works. Yeah.
The sun, I haven't read The Sun Also Rises, Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls.
But you did read The Old Man and the Sea, right? Is that considered a novel?
Yes.
It's more of a novella. Okay.
How would you place this among what you've read from Hemingway, Amber?
Well, I've only read this and The Old Man and the Sea so far by him. I think I like Old Man and the Sea more, even though it's kind of different approaches to the same thing, because it's still about like, proving yourself by killing another living creature. I kind of like the solitary open sea that felt very atmospheric for me, and I enjoyed reading it. I like reading stuff set on the sea in general. I really don't like reading about big cats being killed, so...
I would say The Old Man and the Sea would have been better if it was shorter. If it was more of a longer short story. Yeah,
it is interesting to compare the two, though, because like you said, Amber, they are about the same thing in a sense, but at the same time, they are about very different things, right? Like, from my interpretations, this story is very much a sincere look at how to become a man and how to prove your manhood. It comes more across like, taking a big risk at a point in order to make a name for yourself and to kind of prove yourself, but it ends up killing you. So it's like,
well, it felt like two sides of the same coin. Like Old Man and the Sea was trying to prove who you are to yourself, whereas The Short Happy Life of Francis Mccumber felt like trying to prove that you're a man to other people.
That's interesting because I see the exact opposite.
I mean, like I've only read each of them once. I haven't read Old Man and the Sea in like 3 years or something. It's the only Hemingway I've ever read. That's how I read it. That's how I read both of these.
How would you?
My favorite Hemingway is Snows of Kilimanjaro. My explanation for this is going to seem strange, I suppose, but when I read that in college, and I'll never forget, and I don't even really remember the scene. I think it was the end of the story, though. That the kind of the drifting consciousness of the character, if I'm remembering correctly, as I was reading the end of that story, it made me physically feel like I felt when I would watch the original Star Wars. At the end, when Luke Skywalker is trying to, he's trying to get the shot to kill the Death Star, and there's that moment. It's a really beautiful moment where we see from his perspective, when we see the ship he's kind of floating, and the music is really lovely in that moment, and it feels kind of disembodied. There's just something really kind of wonderful about it, and I remember the end of Snows of Kilimanjaro making me feel that way. And I don't remember if it's the soul of the character kind of leaving or what have you, but there was something really kind of floating and kind of disembodied about the way it made me feel, and that was super cool. Yeah, so even though I can't remember the particulars of what happened in the moment in the story, I remember deeply, how it made me feel, and nothing has ever done that before except that moment.
What Maya Angelou said, you may not remember what somebody had said, you may not even remember what they've done, but what matters is what they've done to make you feel. Not about what they say or do, but how they make you feel is very meaningful. If you are interested in checking out Hemingway and his short stories, here is my collection from published by Scribner, and Jason has a complete collection of his short stories. Larry, I think you have something similar to Jason.
Yes.
I've got the same one, but in ebook form.
One of these things is not like the other. Before we sign off, for those of you that aren't familiar with the channels of our special guests, Amber, what would you want people to know about your channel?
I'm one half of the Drunken Library, which me and my friend Sam, who has her own channel also, Sarcasm and Sci-Fi, but on the Drunken Library, we get drunk and we talk about books. They're drunken book reviews. We have a good time. Personal channel for Amber Unabridged. It's just kind of a mixed bag. I like to talk about short stories. I like to talk about novels, nonfiction, comics, pretty much anything. Talk about what I'm reading and what I feel about it.
And then my channel is it's Old Blues Chapter and Verse. Primarily talk about novels and films, but occasionally I talk about poetry and occasionally I talk about religion. That's really it in a nutshell. So 75 to 80% of the conversation on that channel, or the videos on that channel, deal with long form fiction and cinema.
I highly recommend checking out both of the channels. One of the gladiators, Kayla, her and her friend Brooke had a podcast called Drunk in the Library that they ran. It was from last year to this April. By the time this video comes out, Kayla will have had her baby. They're taking a break from doing the channel, from doing their podcast. But theirs is more about weird history. They'll talk about books, but it's not a booktube channel in any which way.
Okay.
Jason, your wife also has a BookTube channel too.
She does, yeah. Called Books I'm Not Reading.
Mhm.
And it's kind of wild. I mean, I don't think that there are many married booktubers on BookTube. There's just maybe like 3 couples or something. I can't even think of the other 2 off the top of my head, though.
I only know of one other one. I know the Book Brood.
Yeah, I'm not
there's
familiar
that.
with
You used to have Chris and Giselle. That was toward the beginning of my tenure on BookTube.
Are they the ones who got Steve into making videos?
I think so, because they're from Massachusetts.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, I think they may have gotten it. Chris was the Rhodes Scholar I think his something the Rhodes Scholar, and then Giselle's is Giselle Bradley. She just was under her name. Multi-person channels is also a rarity, so I always admire coming across other channels that have multiple people on them.
They're a good time.
This was fun. This was really fun, Josh. This was great.
It's fun digging into this.
Really appreciate having everybody on board. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.
Hey everybody, this is Ari from Literary Gladiators. I hope you guys enjoyed our Zoom discussions. We are now going to start doing some discussions in person for this season, and our next discussion is going to be 8 Yards Down and Out by Bill Amend, which is a Foxtrot comic collection. We're also going to be going over some other Foxtrot funny strips and stuff like that. If you like what you're seeing on our channel, make sure to support our Patreon. We could use as many supporters and we can give you more content. So, this is Ari once again, and I'll see you next week. And remember to keep reading.